Start. Hey, welcome to the Mindedness Revolution. We're back with more meta, reflecting on where we are. Hey, friend, how are you?
Great to be here, Greg. Happy to be back and walk us through another episode. And today we're going to talk about meta-aware, right? And there's going to be hopefully a way to align this to help naturalistic, scientific, humanistic folks have a naturalistic understanding about something as simple and profound as awareness.
Totally.
So that will be part of the task today. Um, just to remind our audience, we talked a little bit about um, tree of knowledge and the ontology of planes of existence, which sounds like far out and wild when I just said that, which is pretty cool. To think about maps of mind and in a very simple way, thinking about mind one, two, and three, kind of brain phenomena, phenomenal phenomena, and the linguistic justificatory process that runs through us. And then now we're discussing a mind four and the idea that that capacity of mind can recurse upon itself. It can go back to essentially mind three and metacognize about
Yep.
itself, which has a superpower of being able to intrapersonally examine oneself and an ego persona experiencing self, and also to interpersonally examine relationships and what am I projecting onto people? What are they projecting onto me? Can I
Totally.
actually see a little more clearly what's happening, right?
Lovely.
And
Yep.
that same superpower we can apply out in the world. And we talked about the ability in the meta-systemic to talk about the ability to see systems of systems, hyper objects and hyper subjects. Essentially, we're saying we're able to model at a higher order complexity and hopefully accuracy. That's part of the
Totally.
heuristic that there's an auto correcting to it to ever more be able to examine and know these things. And we will get to a place where we talk about what is it like to be a hyper subject. So that we'll save that
Right.
for
Let's double check there. So I love let's just the superpower, right? So in many
Mhm.
ways, if we want to nail it down, I would argue the superpower manifests itself in psychotherapy. The first one, like what's its superpower? It's like, oh,
Mhm.
psychotherapy learned we can step outside of our reactivity and reflect on our needs, reflections on our egos, on our relationships, and then this whole superpower, like what is systems, right? And then how are systems interrelated? And then if we do a little UTOK lensing, what's the fifth joint point, right? Where are we across all these different systems and what's happening to the world? So anyway, I love the superpower angle, friend. So I just want to double click on that and clap on it.
I
So
love it. I love it. And so we can same idea. The human being can kind of go down to mind two and look at phenomena, the phenomenal experience. And there's kind of two orders to this. The last one we talked about with the meta attentive, and this is where the minded animal, or in this sense, actually, the culture person is learning to pay attention to what one is paying attention to.
totally.
And if one is not directly in an activity that's absorbing most of attention, you see the mind wanders a lot. It's looking, it's trying to find what's the next thing to focus on or worry about. But that we can actually learn to pay attention, which is a profound thing in itself, learning to
Profound.
focus
Totally.
uh, and learning to flow. So if
Yep.
we're in focus in activity, then that will induce a flow state, which is quite pleasurable and enjoyable and auto rewarding. And I didn't get as much into it this last time, but there's also this capacity to deconstruct and reconstruct, and this is a pathway more well known in kind of East and West, but the
Mm-hmm.
deconstructing, reconstructing project where we're actually able to notice what our senses, our emotions, our thoughts, our proprioception of body, and actually see how those literally construct an experience
Totally.
of being me in the world.
Love it.
Okay.
Love it. Yep. And in terms of the superpower, I'd be able to see that framing. It's that attentional framing of your primate. It's going to grab
Mhm.
it's and then pay. It costs effort. That's why we say it pay attention, right?
Mhm.
And then what's it
Mm.
gripping? In the I quad coin, what's the 2 pi I gripper? Okay. That's
Hmm.
the top-down schema and what's it's hunting for, and how it's trying to pick up certain frequencies at different things, or certain surprising frequencies will inevitably draw attention. And then we can move from there to see what comes on the what actually we were. There's the hand that shines the light. That's attention, and then there's the
That's
light. There's
it.
the light of
That's it.
awareness.
That's it. It's beautiful. So perhaps I'd have to play with this. It just came to me as you talked about the hand. So if the hand is the attention, awareness is almost like letting go.
Right. That's the meta
It's
superpower ultimately. Right.
it's
When
like
you really know.
really letting go, and it's learning to come into contact, at least in the frame we're trying to use, of essentially a naturalistic frame of like you're getting to the ground of mind too. You're getting to this ground of mindedness, um, that is essentially, it doesn't hurt, it's open, it's free. Um, Historically, the Eastern traditions would talk about waking up, right? So
Yeah.
waking up from a separate self. So it's like waking, and so you say waking up from this exclusive identity into a sense of just beingness, or a knowingness that knows.
Totally.
Now, for the people who have no experience with that, that's going to sound outlandishly crazy, as it should. This is it is out of most people's ordinary default experience. But I would reflect on, a first pass. If somebody says, "What's even a taste of that like?" A very simple one would be, "Where were you when you had completed a project or completed some type of task? You were able to go, ah." And just be still for even a moment, and the sense of peace and being, and there's nothing I got to figure out right now. I'm
Wow.
not
I
even,
love that.
just that. So I think we're encountering kind of awareness all the time, right? It is the ground of our mind too. And there are moments of exhaustion where we might find ourselves, or activity and completion, that brief moment, right?
Totally.
And then what does the mind do? It goes, all right, now what else do I got to do, right?
Exactly.
But that moment, and the idea that you can expand that moment, you can come to know at a deeper sense of yourself, is in that beingness and that
Hmm.
knowingness. Now, um, I did want to take another brief moment. I'd like to walk us through a couple of practices, and the why. But I think there are going to be some folks on this call that'll go, "I'm still not buying it, maybe, my friends. So what do you got here?" And so first, I would just kind of point out, I call them the critics and the bypasses of awareness. So
Okay.
critic one is the scientific, the general reductionistic scientific.
Mm.
There is a critique of having a limited vector of knowing, of epistemic knowing. And I was on a call, or actually in a meeting the other day, and I heard, uh, it's just so subjective that people were talking about a thing, and it's like it's actually interesting to think about. That's meant as an insult,
Totally.
right? In that context, that subjectivity is an insult. And
Mhm.
at least what I hope we're trying to do is to say, let's not ignore this huge vector of knowing that's riding within you. What we're actually trying to do is say, let's learn to examine it more carefully, so the
Totally.
subjective experience you're having is more accurate model, more good, beautiful, true, whatever our values want to be here. So one is just a broadening. There is a place for, perhaps, right? At least leave the door open for the critic. There's a spot for examined subjectivity. Um, the second one is just the what I call logically the counterintuitive aspect of that experience, and we'll talk
Okay.
more about this. But we generally view ourselves as in the world. I'm this being in the world, and the meta awareness, or learning awareness of awareness, will change that construct.
Yes.
And so that at some point people may even not experience a world, or experience a self, or realize that that self and that world is arising within some depth of being. They're different words. This is part of it, making the new language. I would say the ground of mind too, or
Totally.
mindedness,
Yep.
that you're actually learning to contact that, and that's kind of fighting your initial ordinary logic, phenomenal logic. And the third one would be even the psychological. Is like, am I going to die? And for some people, it's important to say, particularly that may go in intense meditative retreats, they
Hmm.
can have this death experience, or certain
Right.
psychedelics, people can have this death
Hmm.
experience. And I guess the good news, bad news is what dies is your exclusive identity to being a separate self. What doesn't die is your ego. That thing will just keep coming back. Don't you worry. Right. And that's why you want to work on the metacognitive stuff, because stuff is going to come up as people learn. There's usually stuff we've been suppressing and repressing,
Hmm.
and so that's where people can get into even a spirit, what we call spiritual bypass. This would be now the two bypasses where people just like, I'm going to go spiritual, no awareness,
Right.
and they're not dealing with the stuff that
Right.
comes up. Right.
Wow, lots of good stuff there.
Yeah.
At some point, we come back to the calm and why that
Yeah.
would be a great place for awareness. But that may take us afield because I'd want to get into some technical stuff as to why that's so cool. And let's not do that. In
Yeah.
terms of the fear of dying,
Mm.
I'll just simply say this is where my dad bumps up against this as a somebody who sort of likes his ego, and is afraid of that. And you offer a really important point. A, it will come back. We could also, I would flip this around also, because this is what really sort of Buddhism tries to get to, and point to a quote that I saw in Cadell Last. He's a philosopher around in some of the space ago, which was die again, die better.
Hmm.
Die again, die better. And that's for the ego. Like the ego in relationship to how it grips. And a lot of these practices, if you've heard that the self is an illusion or the ego is an illusion, it is about dissipating and becoming in contact with, oh my God. And that does take some work. And then it comes back. But I do believe the sage mode is in
Hmm.
part how that thing learns to grip and then let go, grip and then let go. With
Hmm.
increasing wisdom and contextual adaptiveness. And that's because it's died. And if it never has died, you will be awfully rigid. So it's the dying
Mm.
and coming back of the ego. And this awareness and attention practices at Mind 2 are about this, and awareness fundamentally, even more than the attention, I said. So this is beautiful.
Beautiful. Yes. And so that's why in many ways we're trying to, and there is much more of this movement now of like mindfulness and direct practices along with the psychological work. Um, there are folks that are doing this kind of work now to kind of make sure they integrate
Mhm.
psychological work and parts
Totally.
with things like direct awareness. It's important to say a lot of the roots of this just comes, I think, A, out of being minded animals and culture persons, and B, in our civilization, you'll see a lot of contemplative systems in Buddhism, Hinduism, that talk about, as liberation or enlightenment. They usually carry very different metaphysical ontologies, and so we were trying to be very careful
Yep.
up front for people who have listened thus far, of like trying to actually say what our metaphysical, like keeping it parsimonious, keeping it to the data that we can see, and so along that same line, I'd like to just even mention there's a guy, Thomas Metzinger, wrote
Yep.
a book called Elephant in the Blind.
Yeah.
And he and among other folks are trying to do more of a contemplative phenomenology and contemplative neuroscience. So you see it where looking more at the brain and correlating with first person, or just looking at experience, but being very careful about what are our epistemic and ontological frameworks, right? Because if I wake up from a separate self and feel awareness, and I realize something like the world is within me, which
Mhm.
sounds counterintuitive, but as a model, it's rising within this mindedness. So is the sense of self. But if I think that's the very referent of reality itself, then all of a sudden I'm going to make metaphysical claims
Right.
like it's all consciousness, right?
Yep.
And what we're trying to say, it's more nuanced than that, but
Hmm.
there's a
Hmm.
partial truth to that, but that's not the
Hmm.
total truth. And
Right.
so anyway, Metzinger, he talks about um, kind of this as a theoretical concept, this minimal phenomenal experience, this like um, this sense of pure awareness, and he goes through this in quite a bit of detail. But he describes it as kind of the simplest form of conscious experience that lacks a few things. time representation, self-location in a spatial frame,
Mhm.
the experience of ownership or
Yep.
agency, and a first-person perspective. So and so
Mm.
he actually calls it the zero-person perspective, right?
Nice.
It's actually the knowingness that knows before a knower comes online, before a
Yeah.
knower recurses in this functional, awareness and responsivity, before that actually starts.
Great.
Um, and in a separate article we wrote about in the UTIC, Unified Theory, and the Knower, three types of awareness. So I
Mhm.
mentioned witness awareness, formless awareness, and non-dual awareness. I did
Mhm.
want to take a moment about that. And these are almost like different phases of
Mhm.
awareness. So one is
Yep.
like awareness is learning to look at
Mhm.
phenomena, right? So it's
Mhm.
learning to look at not just now trees and birds and cars, but it's learning to look at thought and look at feeling and look at perception and look at what's called self, but then not trying to change it, just literally trying to observe it. So
Totally.
it's like a witness awareness. And then a kind of a formless awareness is when all that stuff kind of goes way in the backdrop, right? Or
Yep.
it's barely. And so people can do this more at rest, meditation retreats, where there's not a lot they need to do for, some period of time,
Good.
and to actually know this and know this knowingness that
Mhm.
knows. But then guess what? You're going to, as you should, you get up and you open your eyes and you walk around, and, and then you go back to usually a duality awareness, a here I am in the world,
Mhm.
and there's the world. But there's a type of non-dual awareness where that here I am in the world and here's the world is arising within this sense of awareness, right?
Totally.
And it can be described as this kind of open, spacious, connected, loving, open-hearted. So it's not other than, it's not the goal is not to be spaced out. It's actually to be radically awake to this knowingness, this mind
Mhm.
two, and
Mhm.
then learning and letting the model of yourself and other kind of come
Great.
online, and you're trying to come about it in a more examined way.
That's
So
lovely. If you,
yeah,
I'll just
yeah,
very
yeah, sorry,
quickly
yeah.
say, when John and I were doing Untangling the World, not for anybody that followed that, John made this, and then when I heard about it, this is one of the things I really spurred me to reach out to him, which was the difference between adjectival
Mm,
qualia, which are the formed contents of your mind. Okay, so I open
mm,
up, I see a white and red and blue, and I see a cup. Okay. And now the meta awareness is, where is that cup? And how am I attending to it? And what is this attention? And now well, I'm aware of the cup, but actually in my head, right, at some level, and then just starting to see the witness see, right?
mm,
When you get practice of that, and then ultimately you talk about the form really dissipating,
mm,
and then Metzinger will talk about this in ultimately pure consciousness events. The way John talks about pure consciousness event, what's binding the adjectival forms, but
mm,
adverbial qualia that provide a here-ness, nowness, and togetherness. Okay,
mm,
that's what he talks about, the here-ness, nowness, and togetherness that binds, and that is a kind of awareness. Okay?
mm,
And so now what happens in forms is, oh, I'm somehow present with the binding in a way that the form drops back, right? So you get formless
mm.
binding, which is essentially identifying with the adverbial aspects of qualia
Mm.
in kind of that language.
Beautiful. No, that's spot on. And so, one of the other bypasses that I want to make sure I don't actually do here in the nowness is that we can talk about it. So I would call it intellectual bypass, where we can, and I can be guilty of this too. Okay, of over talking it rather than just practicing it, right? And then the most exquisitely simple version of that would be something like Zen Buddhism, where it's like we're actually not going to talk about that a whole lot, and I'm going to give you some silly riddles that like only make sense if you understand this epistemic knowing, but otherwise they're going to sound silly. So anyway, I
Totally.
say that for our audience
Right.
as well. Just so, well, an important point of the even that adverbial type consciousness, the here-ness and nowness, it's like it's no coincidence that the contemplative technologies that have gone through history, usually there's like the what they could call the progressive path of meditation, where it's like Let me learn to focus concentration. Let me learn how to be still. Let me learn to work on compassion and kindness. And then we're going to do this really advanced, super simple practice that you might have waited, 20 years to get to learn. It's so damn simple, you might miss it. That's what this meta awareness, it's so simple, we might miss it. But they tend to focus on things like space, time, or spatial location,
Mhm.
time,
Mhm.
right? So time of balloons, memory and imagination, a sense of selflessness. So let's look for the self, and effortlessness or surrender, right? So uh, I want to just play a moment with those, and to
Okay.
actually say it's important that people could do a particular practice in one of those domains. People will commonly find an attraction to various types. So
Mhm.
maybe the spatial is great, but not the
Mhm.
time, or vice versa. But I'm gonna play with a few of those.
Okay.
Um, so let's just do this together. One, I want to play with selflessness for a second. In first patch, we should all say, wait, what do you mean selflessness? So part of it is let's find where we are, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
if we kind of just settle the mind, because the mind, the thoughts want to get going and going and answer. The clear thing is a thought is not the answer. A thought is not the answer of meta awareness. Okay. We can secondarily use thought and language to describe it, but that's not it. Right. So
Right.
with that caveat to say, if I'm looking out at the world in experience, do I say that that is me? And most of us would say, no. Okay. And say, okay, let's look and say, okay, where am I located? And so I have a sense of body, right? You have
Mhm.
a sense
Mhm.
of body. If you dive deep, you say, am I my body? And most of us would, many times we would say, I have a body. It
Mhm.
just feels right. I have a body, but I'm not my body.
Right. Mhm.
Okay. Okay. Let's kind of keeping it loose,
Mhm.
keeping it light, kind of right effort, right? This is one of
Mhm.
these don't try too hard.
Mhm.
You'll really miss it, right? We'll both miss it. Okay. So I have feelings. There's feelings. Uh, okay. Am I my feelings? No. How would I know? Well, feelings come and go. There's something that feels like it may have some more duration or durability. Okay, well, maybe I'm my thoughts, right? Hmm. It's actually an interesting one. We commonly behave as if we're our thoughts, okay?
Mhm.
But if I actually look, and even you say, I have thought, but there's something that is aware of thought, right? So
Definitely.
that which is aware of thought must not be then thought. So I must not be thought. Okay, right. And then there's kind of an interesting place to then say, well, then who am I? And
Mhm.
to just sit with that without answering it with a thought, without answering it with a perception or a feeling. So that's one way of playing with, particularly with the mind, trying to say, what
Totally.
is this awareness thing? It's like to deconstruct out.
Mhm.
Another one would be in the efforting. So there are times where people we're trying so hard. So let's play with that one as an effortlessness one, right? So what if just for a few moments you gave yourself permission to not know, to not know, to not know what's happening, to not know what happened or will happen, to let go of a sense of control, that there's something I have to like make sure I know or have happen a certain way, or I have to experience something a certain way. So I don't have to know, I don't have to control, I don't have to know what's happening, I don't have to know what this is, right? So we're quickly, this is whatever this is, right? What if I just let that go for a moment? let go of those thoughts and justifications of what this is, right? Or this isn't, right?
Totally.
Okay. All right. Let's play with a couple more, time and
Okay.
space, right?
All right.
So the time, so usually most of us, most of the time, are so immersed in memory and imagination. We think about our sense of time psychologically or experientially. It's usually related to a memory arising now or an imagination of something that might happen arising now. So memory and imagination, our sense of knowing, a sense of knowing the past and the future, arises memory and imagination right now. Okay. What if I gave permission to just let memory and imagination come and go? But notice, what is it coming and going in, right? What is it? Let me just step back into this now, right? And notice that there is that which that changes, and there's that which that feels still, silent, motionless. Can I slow it down enough just to like peer between in the gap of
Right.
the next thought? And that's part of the slowing it down, right? Slowing it down. And then last one I'll just tease with is about space.
Okay.
So you say, where are you located? Right? If you push people, they'll usually say, like here, man.
Behind my
Like
eyes
I'm
somehow.
right there.
I like
Yeah.
some sort of
Right.
third magic eye back here.
That's right. And if we got a curious neurosurgeon and he opened it up, like, I just don't see you anywhere, man. Right. So I just can't find you. That's kind of a third person looking for where am I located, right?
Totally.
So even first and third, you can't find them. Where did he go, right? Um, and so there are various parts of practices. There's a guy Douglas Harding who did some work with like the headless way, which sounds
Yes.
wild, but what it and there Locke Kelly does some cool work with
Okay.
a spacious awareness. But basically, you're working through the schema of like I'm located behind this head, right? And so what it'll commonly do is have people look out, and we're usually, if you notice attention or a visual attention, we're usually located on an object in its environment. What if you intentionally like let the eyes soften a little bit where you're not actually focused on anything, right? And you actually feel it's strange for people not tried it, but feel into the space in front of you, you know, without any strong attention on any object, feeling into the space to the side of you, above you, below you, feeling into that space. Okay. And you can feel into that a little bit away from the body, as far away as you want. There can be a nice little shift, and it's a subtle thing of feeling into a spaciousness. And if you sit with it a moment, you know, it's like, what is this spaciousness like? It's actually open, it's free, it's not feeling any pain. It holds the pain, it holds the joy, it holds whatever is arising and whatever's passing. And within that space, you can embody and feel, you know, embodied, not in headed, embodied, right?
Right.
Right.
Nice.
And connected,
Embedded.
right? And then to kind of connect back out. So anyway, these are I just wanted to play with these kind of four modes.
Love it.
It's not a stretch, space, time, self, and effort.
Right.
Keep coming up over and over in these practices, and we can start to differentiate those from a particular practice and a particular metaphysics, and in right relationship, ground it in what makes more sense for folks today. So
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So, first off, yeah, getting this took me a long time as somebody trained in psychotherapy, like the self and the way you think and all, even the attentional structures. Even in 2011, I don't have pure awareness as part of the vector. It's just the experiential self. I hid the pure awareness inside the experiential self. And then it took me a little while. Some of my work with Rob Scott and others just sort of like, of course. And then you see it, it's obvious. And then you're like, well, wait a minute. Well, then why wasn't it there? Right. And then that's really, and so that has been a journey for me. I love the way you have delineated those little exercises. That's really, really helpful. In terms of how it, just to, not to put too much thought on it, but to just show that it's got a framework for it. So the little iQuad coin, like one of the mantras here is toggle between self and awareness. Okay, that's a UTOK mantra, and then that means that you're going to grip and understand, and then shift, right? And the core awareness is in the human identity function, and that's your moments of ontic, epistemic awareness, and these are the smallest everyday moments of see that you're trying to say, how do we get in between? These are the flashes where an epistemic is grabbing an ontic. And if you, for me, the whole duck rabbit, like I'll watch myself do the duck rabbit. And when it's a duck, that's one flash. And then the rabbit's the other flash. And then I'll observe the space in between my awareness system, right? Just as another example of seeing awareness and the ability to have awareness without thought. They learned this about a couple thousand years ago, at least, by the way.
Yeah, right.
And I didn't know it as a psychologist until about 10. That's kind of weird in the West, folks. You know, that's like, probably should have known that for a while. But anyway, there it is. This is a beautiful, I think you walked us through this beautifully. And really gives us a little experience of meta-awareness across a number of different angles. And it's bringing my awareness out in a particular way. So it was well done for sure.
Beautiful. Thank you, Greg. And again, for folks, you could have easily tapped into those practices and had a shift, or you might not have, and that's okay. There's a reason why these super simple techniques were saved for later in a lot of the traditions, because it's so simple we can gloss over it. The other side of it, though, it is so simple and so profound, right? So what happens to the human being that starts to know itself from a place of knowing, right? That's actually not, the content is secondary, right? Or adjectival, as you said. And to actually know oneself from a place of grounded being, these are words, but a sense of freedom. How about that? Phenomenally free, open, loving, the capacity to be open changes. It will also mean the stuff that you're still hung up about. And I put myself in this camp, now you got to work on it. Right. And so it's not a stretch that people may go into these practices and all of a sudden find themselves needing to do some psychotherapy or some coaching to work through some material. And that's actually normal. It's like actually things that have been repressed, suppressed, fixated on, and stuck in a drawer start to come out, right? Yeah. And that's you healing as a human being. That's okay, right?
Absolutely.
But we're on that journey of talking about this Mind4,
right?
Trying to actually. So in my own world, these are usually different groups of people. These are people going the meditator, and they're on a certain pathway, or the metasystemic, like big picture thinker, or the psychotherapist. Those tend, overgeneralizing a little bit, but those tend to be different people. We're actually saying these are capacities. They're skills that can become capacities that allow you to emerge into this world, right? And we'll get to some more of this, of how this reassigns meaning and purpose and other things. If you're even not going there, to say, here is this dimension of being, a dimension of your mind, of mindedness, that you can come to know directly. And people have been doing it for thousands of years. And there's something you may gain from that that's like really beautiful, like releasing the existential angst, right? There's a lot of that right now. Right. So imagine learning to let go of the existential angst and then being able to show up, right? There's so much energy that went into protecting ourselves from that.
Right.
And to now be able to show up and say, how can I bring some more good into the world? Right. And so that's
Beautiful.
part of what we're doing.
Hey, no, that's exactly right. And that is, it is that dialectic that we mean by toggle between self and awareness. And it's not easily apparent, by the way. The reason my dad didn't want to give it up is because, and we've seen this in some cases, when people get in touch with this, there's a distancing that could be that can either be disturbing or result in a disturbing way of being. Okay. We didn't get into too much detail, but we need the whole nest. But the ability to be aware in the way you're talking is beautiful. And so now we've laid out our 4 pillars. I think next time we'll then talk about, sort of this revisit this meta phenomenology and kind of summarize it. But we have it as metacognitive awareness of the self. We have it as metasystemic. We have it as meta attention and now meta awareness. And it's inviting us to think about a Mind4 reality in a very, very clear and fascinating way. So thanks so much.
Right. Yes. Thank you, Greg. Look forward to more for sure.
All righty, folks. Thanks. Take care.